So, Richard, thanks very much for making time to be on the Ideas Lab podcast.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Whereabouts are you at the moment? I'm recording this in Ubud in Bali, sitting in my hotel room because it's 32 degrees centigrade outside and I can't cope. So I'm in some air conditioning. Where are you? You're somewhere in Cambridge, did you say? Yeah.
Yeah, WeWork has just opened a new space near Cambridge Station in the UK, and I'm here enjoying their fantastic internet and a very empty offices. I think it's only just opened, so it's
Yeah, so everything's
it's good,
pristine and new. Lovely. So right. I wanted to talk to you. We know each other, sort of, from Deloitte. In fact, our bizarre story is that we were both working in the same department at Deloitte at the same time, but we met in the basement of a comedy bar, a comedy club.
That's right.
Where we were both on the same stand-up comedy course, the Amused Moose famous comedy course, and
that's it.
So you were a Deloitte consultant about the same time as me.
That's right.
Why did you start doing a comedy course? Stand-up comedy.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I'd done comedy at university. I was an electronic engineer at university with a sideline in writing sketches, and we took a show, The Triumphant Sausage, to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland, and we were critically panned, but it was a good learning experience. And always had an interest in comedy. And actually, when I first left university and came to London, I worked in a bar and was doing stand-up comedy, and didn't really get very far with it. Took a job coding in the city, found my way into Deloitte, and then had put that creative part of me somehow pushed it down for several years. Well, of course, one is creative as a consultant, but not in the same way. And where had I got to? That's right. And I suppose it had been 6 or 7 years as hard work as a consultant, traveling around, and something in me must have
snapped.
Decided I needed to do snapped. Needed to do something more creative. Found my way to this course. Was recollecting that the first time round I'd done it, it hadn't gone brilliantly well. In fact, I remember the pub in the East End where I took my comedy, and
oh wow,
they were pretty much perplexed by what had just happened. It certainly weren't laughing.
That's not a good reaction. You are perplexed is not a good adjective to be. Yeah,
exactly. So I thought, well, maybe I should get some training, and maybe I'll have a better shot at it this time.
And so we were sitting in the basement, and I said something like, "What do you do?" It was towards the end of the course, and he said, "Oh, I work at Deloitte." And I went, "Well, so do I. Where?" And he said, "The Strand." And I said, "Well, so do I. In which department?" And he went, "TMT, Telecoms, Media and Technology, whatever it is." And I went, "Well, so do I." But the fact is, you've been on project the whole time because you've been at Sky TV. And so you what kind of consultant were you? You're like a management consultant in general, or?
So I had come to Deloitte with my coding skills, and I was still doing some amount of software engineering as a consultant, and I suppose it was a broader role because in Deloitte you never just I don't want to say that sounds pejorative. One is usually has some technical skills that you're deploying, and then you get involved in much more management aspects as well, which was definitely the case with me there at Deloitte. I was doing project management and bits and pieces of design architecture, and so it was a technical consulting managementy role.
Yeah. And so then you do the 12-week Amused Moose comedy course with me with Logan Murray, who's a great teacher. And where did you go afterwards? Because at the end, I went and did a handful of gigs, which most of them went quite well, actually. You went and started something else, didn't you? You want to explain what that was?
Well, So, I mean, initially, I actually started a comedy club above a goth club on Wardour Street in the middle of Soho in London, which is the kind of the gay, well, at least was a gay, pretty creative quarter within within London, and we had a room above this golf pub.
Yeah.
We called it the 99 Club.
I remember.
It was at 99 Wardour Street.
Yeah, because I performed at the 99 Club. Because was it Richard Warrianecki who was running it with you?
Jim Warrianecki.
Jim Warrianecki.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim and I started it together. And in fact, my dad came down and put the hooks for our very first black curtain behind the stage there, above this pub. And it was an extraordinary pub. You weren't allowed to wear a tie in this pub. It was full of goths, and we had a pretty sort of straight mainstream audience, and they'd walk through this pub and be like, what the hell have we come into? And then they'd come upstairs, and then and we gargoyles on the walls and bits of old motorbike. It was just this ridiculous room, but it was fun to do comedy, and we ran that for a few years, Jim and I. I mean, Jim has now taken it on, has done incredibly well with it.
Yeah.
He's got clubs all over London, and he's made a huge go of it. So brilliant that I did that, and after a while I felt like I wanted to do something broader. Like we had a punk band show up one night and sort of perform at the end of the gig, and I had decided, I like the idea of doing something broader than simply the comedy, and then went on to create Bonobo Presents. Bonobo is a type of ape, and when the technical meaning of Bonobo Presents is when a bonobo presents its genitalia to other.
I didn't know that bit. I knew you'd mentioned the bonobo thing because they're the most promiscuous apes or animals in the world or something, but I didn't know the bit about presents. Oh my god! Yeah.
So it's part of the way they communicate with each other. Actually, and now of course they have what they're famous for is having a lot of sex, obviously, in any which way. And so it was a fun, it's just a fun thing to create this show around. Fun idea to create the show around, and it was pretty sexy. We had a lot of burlesque dancers and so on, and we had comedians and poets and performance artists. We took it out of this. Well, we created it in a much more salubrious, much more grand and luxurious setting around the corner, the Cafe Royale.
Right, and I ended up running Scanners Night there once, but it's a great venue, and it's a shame they closed it because it's like this really old-fashioned bar, mirrors everywhere, and it feels like something from 100 years ago. So, and that did pretty well, didn't it? How long? That
did really well. We were after a while. We were selling out. We were the world's only carbon neutral cabaret club.
Oh, really?
So we offset all of our cabaret.
Wow!
And that got the interest. Channel 4, which are the major TV stations in the UK. So they filmed at our cabaret night, the world's one and only carbon neutral cabaret night, and so we did that. We did get a lot of press because I was running it with Melanie, who was a PR professional, so of course she was brilliant at that, and we had a hell of a lot of fun doing that for a few years. Initially on the side, actually, but right at the start. I'd quit Deloitte. By the time, and so somewhere in the mix, I took the leap and screwed Deloitte work, and jumped out of working as a Deloitte consultant. Yeah.
But were you making enough money from Bonobo Presents to live on, or had you gone into contracting or something?
So that's right. So I was contracting. I had a little bit, not much, but a little bit left over from working at Deloitte, which I suspect probably kept me going for a while. And then and I was contract. So I was very lucky. Deloitte took me back on as a contractor, which was extraordinarily lucrative. And I managed to do that part time. So I said I'd come back, and I'd only do it 3 or 4 days a week, which they were very accommodating of, and the client, which was the BBC. So it was great. For a while there, it was fantastic. I was making a lot of money as a contractor, having a huge amount of fun running this cabaret show. It was a good.
I mean, that's a similar journey to me as well, because I ended up contracting, and I think there's an interesting point here for anyone who wants to break out of a job and go consulting, contracting. People will always say that they want you full time on a contract, or even they want you back in a job. And if you take them at face value, you would imagine that it would be impossible to do what both you and I did, which is to work 3 days a week. And yet, if you stand firm and you just go, I am only available 3 days a week, depending on the kind of work you're doing, sometimes it's not practical. Often people will cave because they'd rather have you 3 days a week than not at all. And it sounds like that's what Deloitte did with you, or what the BBC, who was the end client, did with you. And in fact, it was the BBC I was contracting for during the similar period as well. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. You push past that initial resistance, and quite often they'll say, I mean, a friend of mine was talking about his wife, who's a lawyer, and they tried to say to her, well, we'll let you come back 4 days a week. She's a mother as well, and she didn't want to work full time. She said, no, I'm only going to work 3 days a week, take it or leave it. And eventually they caved, you're right.
Yeah.
They said, okay, we'd rather have you 3 days than no days. So, yeah, you're right. I think often people are in a stronger position than they perhaps initially perceive that they're in.
Yeah.
And of course, not always. I mean,
and you have to be good at what you do.
Very fortunate positions.
Yeah. And we had specific, I think you had broadcast expertise, and so did I. So if you've got some sort of specialist thing and people need it and they really want you, then they will bend. So how long did Bonobo Presents go for?
It was a couple of years. I think it was 2 or 3 years, and we set up an agency. So it was a purveyor of jugglers and dancers to aristocratic parties in London for a while, which was a lot of fun. So I was a cabaret impresario, I think you could say, for a few years, and I actually found my way back.
Go on.
I found my way back to comedy. So interestingly, after a while, I decided that I was getting quite jealous of these comedians coming on the show. So I would MC the show and I'd present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage and the comedian of the night. And then I'd watch them from the sidelines and think, oh yeah, I'd actually really love to be doing that. I'd love to be doing the comedy. And so I went full circle and then went really back pretty hard into comedy, picking up where I left off, by which point Jim's club had got so big the night he wouldn't book me, so I couldn't go back to the 99 club. But,
so the club you helped to start wouldn't hire you, wouldn't book you. It's great.
Exactly. They'd got too big. And but after a while, working hard on the circuit, I did start to get to the point where I was getting asked to do more and more gigs around the country, and I still remember my first check for £15 for my first paid gig down on the south coast. So that was a lot of fun for a while.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So have you never worried about what your clients might think? The BBC or Deloitte. Were you worried if they saw the footage on Channel 4 of Bonobo Presents, or if they knew you were a jobbing comedian? Were you ever worried that might clash with the kind of corporate image, or you just don't care?
Yeah, I was, and I was very wary when things ended up, because I mean this was in the early days of YouTube, but there was still a little bit of that going on. People filming gigs and stuff getting out online, and it definitely was a worry, because my act was pretty blue. I mean, I wasn't an opener. I was definitely late night at the end of once the audience had warmed up. It was So it was a concern. It certainly was a concern, and it may have got to a point where had I continued with it at some point, it would have been unsustainable to be having a really dark blue comedy act and playing the role of a trusted corporate advisor simultaneously. I mean, it was a pretty bizarre life for a while, because I'd be on stage in Birmingham, which is sort of in the middle of the UK, at midnight, knowing I had a meeting with a client at 8 a.m. the next day in London. And so that there was a few months where it was a pretty demanding double life.
I mean, it sounds like you're not afraid to work hard on whatever you're doing. I mean, we shouldn't kind of deny that that's a factor in all these things being quite successful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think working hard, persevering, like going through the big shit phase, just keep on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, well, it sounds like you actually had a slightly different ride with comedy. It sounded like you were pretty good right from the start. I mean, I had more in common with most comedians, which actually is they're pretty awful for quite a long time before they start getting good. I was definitely in that camp.
Well, I was weird in that I sort of turned it around in the last meeting of the comedy course. And I did there's a performance. So you do this 12-week comedy course in the basement of the Muse Moose Comedy Club with Logan Murray. And then at the end, everyone does a gig where you do a 5-minute slot in front of an audience, which is quite big, which is basically made up of the friends of all the people who are performing. And I was like second but last. And I did actually a good job and people laughed. It's a fairly forgiving audience because it's friends and stuff. I came off and somebody said, "Oh my God, you get the award for most improved." So clearly I'd managed to turn it around just by that last thing. And the challenge for me was understanding the difference between funny writing. So when you're writing an article and you want to be funny, and funny stand-up, which is like a whole different level of funny, because I would say stuff on stage, during the course, and people would like go, and sort of like you would when you're reading an article and go, "Oh, that's clever, that's funny, it's interesting." But that you don't want people doing that in a comedy audience. They've got to actually, convulse with laughter. So it was that transition I had to get the hang of. And I had at least one bum gig that was terrible. I only did about 5, and other ones that were good, and at least 2 or 3 that went quite well. So it's kind of it's quite a journey you've been on. And then you kind of went on, this is probably, at what point you went on this big therapeutic journey? And when did you start to get into that?
Well, it was Monkey Business, which is another simian themed night in London. And
oh yeah, I remember Monkey Business. That's in Camden.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Monkey Business in I think it was Kensal Green. So in the north of London, I think Martin Besserman ran it, and he's announcing the acts to come on stage. And he's saying, "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 types of acts you'll see. Some of them, in 10 years' time, will be on your television screens. Some of them you'll never see again, and that's a good thing. And some of them should really be doing therapy." And when he said that, it was like this dagger to my soul. I was like, man, that is absolutely right. I mean, you could argue that all art is some form of therapy, but I am inflicting on my audience these pains from deep in my soul, and I would be much better off working through this with a therapist, was what my intuition was telling me. Yeah. And that was the moment, that was the fork in the road. And at that point I was like, okay, this comedy's going okay. It wasn't like I was having some stellar success, but it was going okay. And I could certainly see a path where I was going to improve over time. But that was the moment I thought, no, I really need to be doing therapy, not comedy. And I didn't then, I saw out the rest of the bookings that I had, and then really started going hard into working on myself. And the initial act there was to go out to California, Santa Monica, and do 21 days in the Primal Center, which is a therapy center that's still going, that's set up by a guy called Arthur Janov, who wrote the famous book The Primal Scream, was John Lennon's therapist. And I worked with his staff there. He was by that point not actively doing therapy, but still the intellectual force behind it. And I started to have some big breakthroughs. I cried for the first time in about 5 years with my therapist there on like day 18 of this 21 intensive, where he'd been trying to break me for every day.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
the best
God.
part of a month. And then he sent me to watch this movie. I watched this movie and I sort of started to well up a little bit in this movie. And then the next day in the therapy session, I just wailed, and that was like the floodgates opening. And that began then, I suppose what has now been 10 years of very, very deep work, which has been extraordinarily demanding and rewarding, and has very much changed my life and who I am.
Yeah, I mean, I heard, I remember I ran into you a few years ago, and it was dramatic, the kind of things you were reporting. So for anyone who doesn't know primal therapy, this is the classic stuff where you are screaming and crying and shouting and stuff. What's the kind of philosophy behind it, if you can sum it up?
Yeah, so, I mean, how to sum it up? I suppose one of the principal ideas is this idea of resonance. So, and what does that mean? It means that if I'm experiencing some feeling in the present, some annoyance at a boss or a partner, or I'm acting in some compulsive way, it's because I'm being driven by not the feeling in the present, but a feeling deep from the past. So when I think about it, I think about it like there's like a little bell ringing in the present, but really that's resonating with a big kind of bell that's ringing in the down the path of time to some event in my past. So we get triggered in this way. I mean, sometimes the way it gets summed up is hysterical is historical. So when I've got some kind of overreaction, some emotion in the present, really it's being driven by something that I'm repressing or have suppressed deep in my past. So that's the premise of it. And the idea with primal therapy, and I think any kind of these therapies that work at a deep level, is that we go back to those early events and initiate a grieving process.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. So we actually kickstart what a natural capacity that we all possess, and that's the ability to grieve. And what that therapy does is it puts me back in that place where I was in pain, where a primal need of mine wasn't being met, fundamental need wasn't being met, and then allow myself to grieve the unmet need. That's what we talk about in primal therapy. And through doing that, I resolve forever that part of me that's damaged. So it's curative in that respect. And that's, I think, that's for me, that's what distinguishes it from a lot of other therapeutic paradigms, is that it's curative. You dissolve that aspect of one's damaged psyche permanently.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, and I guess for many people entering this path, there's a lot to work on. And in fact, France Janov's wife talks about this process as like emptying a bathtub with a teaspoon. So it's a lifetime's work, and it's extraordinarily liberating.
It sounds
in this way, or at least it has been for me.
Sounds horrific to go through. Is it not just like, oh my God, do you dread the sessions?
Sometimes, that's true. Sometimes I'm like, oh, God, am I ready for this tonight? That's true. Sometimes I do, but no. Ultimately, I'm drawn to do them because I experience such ultimately such relief from doing it. So it's in some ways I feel immensely privileged that I have the time and the resources to do all this. So, I'm well aware that there are a lot of people who would not have the wherewithal to take on this work because for long periods I've not been able to work. I've not been able to function as in relationships or in generally in life. A lot of the time it is lying on the floor, bawling your eyes out. So it's, not everybody has the circumstances where they can allow themselves to do that. So and
the therapy is not too cheap either if you actually do it with the Janov Institute, is it? It's quite pricey. So
no, it's not. Well, I mean, initially the big expense was going out to California to do it, but actually now I do it over Skype. I haven't been back to California for years, and I don't need to do it as intensively as I did. But it's not. I mean, it's expensive in the sense that all therapy is expensive. You're having to pay a professional by the hour, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's any more expensive than any other therapist, really.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that most people never begin this journey. So people largely, they end their life pretty much in the same state they were when they enter adulthood, more or less. So it's a rare person who, yes, you've got the means to do it, but it's a rare person who actually invests the time and the energy and the, you know, distress it's going to evolve along the way in order to unwrap it and actually change yourself. So I think it's an amazing thing.
Yeah. I think it's certainly true that not many people do it. And interestingly enough, we're back to Deloitte. I think one of the moments for me early on in my career with Deloitte was looking at the partners there who were maybe 10, 15 years down the track. And now some of them are very healthy and, you know, people I looked up to. But a lot of them, you know, were overweight, heavy drinkers, mistresses, you know, all the rest of it, and had pretty dysfunctional lives, you know, despite being, of course, very wealthy. And there was a part of me that could see that might be my future. You know, I'd be one of those guys who was making a fortune, but ultimately a bit of a wreck. And something in me knew I didn't want to do that. And that helped drive me actually. Firstly, to look at more creative ways to make a living, but then ultimately took me into this therapeutic path.
Yeah. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking of the two partners that were involved in my team, and they were very odd until we merged with Anderson Business Consulting, and then those people seem to be a bit more together. But I won't mention any names. And now, so what do you do now? Because I described you the other day when we met up as like you do therapy shit in corporates at a high rate, which you laughed at. But it's quite an achievement because you are kind of doing soft skill stuff. You're doing stuff that's a bit like therapy. And I'm not being derogatory about therapy because a lot of people know I'm in therapy myself and I'm a big fan of it. So, but I'm kind of being a bit lighthearted about it. What are you doing in corporations these days? Can you name drop a couple of companies you've worked for that you're allowed to mention?
Yeah, so I can talk about the BBC. They've been a client of mine over the years, and John Lewis, who are a big retailer in the UK. Mm-hmm. I have done work. I had some limited engagement with the Olympic Games, so they were. It was great to work with someone from the Olympics. Mm-hmm. Adidas, I've had done some work with some of their guys. So yeah, there's been some bigger names, and then Aberdeen City Council I'm currently doing some work with. So there's a range of clients that I work with. Yeah.
And what are you doing with them? How would you describe it?
So there are three ways in which we work. So the first is at an individual level, and this is where we might be getting to the therapy shit aspect of it. So this is coaching individuals, principally around their leadership, and some of that is more is in a coaching stance. So it's about where they're looking for what they need to be held accountable for, what vision they're creating, what possibility are they standing for within their organization, what commitments are they making. So that's a big part of what we do with individual leaders. And we will look at their history, but in some of the workshops that we do, we'll ask people to write out their life story, to share their life story with others, to start to join the dots between where their current behaviors and how some of that behavior got set up in their past. What were the events in their past that they have now carry a story around? So we will, to that extent, delve into individuals and their past as a way to have them be fuller expressions of themselves in the present. So that's part of the work we do. And then a lot of the work we do is around team dynamics and organizational culture, where we're creating spaces for people to explore where they're great and where there are dysfunctions, and then help people to get clear on what it is they're going to do to move forward, what the steps that they're going to take, what the experiments they're going to make within their team or within their culture in pursuit of some business goal. And that's the third aspect where we'll go to work, is with companies, is where they have a specific goal, and we will design an intervention around that goal. And then we might bring several of those strands into play: the individual coaching, the team coaching.
And do you think you would have ended up doing this if you hadn't done all the therapy, if you hadn't done all the work on yourself? Do you think you would have ended up doing this, or would you have ended up somewhere else, do you think?
No, I think I would have ended up as a technically oriented management consultant. I think I'd have stayed on the track. Interesting what you said. I think most people, as you say, don't feel drawn to do a lot of deep work on themselves, and tend to follow a relatively consistent path through their lifetime, and tend to stick with whatever it was they started doing out of uni. They'll often pursue that for the rest of their lives, assuming they find it satisfying. And I mean, in many ways, I was very satisfied with the work I did at Deloitte. It was intellectually stimulating. I worked with good people. Deloitte actually a great firm to work for in many, many ways. So I could have seen myself continuing on that track. But once I started the self-reflection, it's like you open those floodgates and it all emerges, right? It's like opening Pandora's box. It's all then starts to flood out, and who knows where I'm going to end up, or where. Well, certainly I didn't know at the beginning of that where I might find myself. But yes, you're right. And as your question, I know there's no way I've been doing this deep work with teams and individuals in the way that I am had I not done all that work on myself.
And your company is First Human, but you also, which you run, your co-founder of, with who's your business partner?
So Oddy Ashine is my business partner. And then we've got a couple of other partners, Philida and Gary. Yep.
Oh, okay, right. And you also run a podcast called Being Human.
Yeah.
And what made you want to? What made you want to create a podcast?
Well, I said part of the motivation here is when I first met Oddy, it was like breathing oxygen. So all of my business conversations at the time were satisfying at level. But when I first started engaging with Oddy, who had a company called SLP at the time, before we together founded First Human, it was just this depth of conversation that I wasn't getting anywhere else in my business relationships, that I really appreciated and craved and wanted more of, right? So that drew me initially to working with Oddy, and then ultimately creating First Human, the coaching and consulting company we now have. And out of that insight was this desire to create that space more broadly. And that's what Being Human is about. It's about creating deeper conversations which people can listen to and participate in within a business context. That's the purpose for creating Being Human.
Yeah. No, and I love it. And I love the whole theme of bringing the humanity back to the corporate world. And I think the world has changed since we were at Deloitte, and people understand that a lot better. But it's still a world apart between the conventional corporate world and how we might think as entrepreneurs and creatives who run our own careers. So it's good that you're in there bringing putting on the agenda things like, well, your history is actually part of what's going on here in the room, in whatever problem you're having at work. So I think that's so important.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. And I think we'll find, I mean, I haven't read the book actually, but Siraj Siroza, the guy who wrote Conscious Capitalism, I understand has written a book called The Healing Organization. I actually did a talk, this is before the book came out, called the Healing Organization at a conference. And I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah.
I think that as we evolve as a society and become more open to these questions and self-reflection, these deeper questions and self-reflection, we will learn, I think, that creating healing spaces for people in organizations is one of the most powerful way you can unleash creativity, productivity, coherence within teams. I believe that this is where we're heading.
No, I think that's brilliant, and I love the idea of a corporation or an organization can be a a space for healing, not just making money, not just people functioning to their best abilities, but actually, I never even thought of a company like that before, but a place where everyone gets better, in every way.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Where we can help each other heal and grow.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
And grow in the broadest sense.
Yeah. So if people want to know more about you, tell them the website address.
Yes, so firsthuman.com. And if you want to hit the podcast, it's firsthuman.com/podcast. That will get you to the Being Human podcast. And then you'll see all the episodes there, and then links out to iTunes and YouTube.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Richard. What an amazing journey. And what a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, John.
I love it. So I'm really glad.
I've always felt like it was all about me this time, but of course, you've got an extraordinary journey as you sit out in Bali interviewing me.
Yeah. Well, I talked about our parallels there, and I think it's funny how our lives have gone along in parallel in the ways that they have. So glad I ran into you in that basement in Soho and spoke to you. So great.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you, John.